The house has been waiting. You can feel it before you see it. Something in the air changes about a quarter-mile out. The salt gets heavier, the light gets thinner, and the road narrows like it is trying to discourage you from continuing. Then you come around the last bend in the Georgia Coast Road, and there she is. $15 million of glass, white marble, and precision-engineered steel, rising out of the waist-high dead grass like a broken crown. The windows are boarded with gray plywood warped from 3 years of humidity. The white Italian marble is weeping long orange streaks of rust down its face, like the building has been crying since the day it was abandoned. The steel frame that I promised would stand for 100 years is bleeding through the walls. And standing in front of it, her back to the road, her $2,000 wool coat swallowed by the dead grass up to her knees, is Evelyn. She has the deed. She has the keys. She has legal right to every inch of the structure. She is standing in the mud because the house has become a tomb. She is here to say goodbye to something she never understood. She just does not know I am here yet. My name is Caleb Thorne. I am 48 years old. I built that house with my own hands and my grandfather's principles. I put it in her name as a wedding gift because I loved her completely and trusted her absolutely. And then she did what she did. What Evelyn never understood, what she could not have understood because she never asked, was that a house like this is not a collection of materials. It is a living system. And when I walked out of that courthouse with nothing but my grandfather's toolbox and a brass key she had never thought to ask about, I took the pulse with me. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. I did not come from money. My grandfather built heavy steel tools in a workshop behind his house in Macon, Georgia. The smell of that workshop, machine oil and hot metal and cedar sawdust, is still the smell I associate with safety. He would sit me down on an overturned bucket and tell me things that did not make sense until they did. He said, "Caleb, beauty is a coat of paint. Integrity is a matter of physics." He said, "If the anchor is weak, the sail does not matter." He said, "Build for the earth you have, not the earth you wish you had." I spent 20 years becoming the man who made those principles into a profession. I specialize in difficult foundations, the kind of ground that shifts, the kind of soil that wants to reclaim whatever you put on it. The Georgia coast is some of the most demanding terrain in the country. Salt air, tidal movement, high humidity, clay soil that expands and contracts with the seasons. Most builders avoid it. I sought it out. I made my reputation solving problems other engineers walked away from. I was the silent partner in the skyline, the one who worked underground so the lights could stay on above it. And on a Thursday evening in Savannah, at a fundraiser for a land conservation trust, I met Evelyn Marsh. She was standing near the back of the room looking at an aerial photograph of the Georgia coastline, and she said, without turning to look at me, "Whoever built the retaining walls on the Delwood development either knew exactly what they were doing or got extraordinarily lucky." I told her it was neither. It was obsessive preparation. She turned and looked at me for a long moment. She said, "That is the most attractive thing anyone has ever said at one of these events." I laughed. I could not help it. That was how it began. Not with a grand gesture. With a conversation about soil composition at a conservation fundraiser. She was a landscape architect. She understood land the way I understood foundations. We spoke for 3 hours and left together. We were married 14 months later. I thought I had found the one person in the world who understood what I was actually doing when I built things. I was right about that. I was wrong about what she planned to do with that understanding. 12 years ago, I stood on a piece of Georgia coastline that everyone else had written off, and I saw something different. I saw a canvas. The land sat on a salt marsh at the edge of the Atlantic. Previous developers had tried and failed twice. The first structure sank within 8 years. The second was condemned after 5. The marsh had won both times. The locals called it cursed land. I called it a problem I had not solved yet. I spent 4 years on that project, most of it in boots caked with red clay. I hand-selected every slab of Tennessee fieldstone for the retaining walls. I flew to Italy to oversee the marble cutting. I designed what I called the atmospheric control system, a custom-built network of sensors, pumps, and algorithms that was the brain of the building. It monitored moisture levels in the reclaimed teak floors. It regulated internal pressure to prevent the salt air from eating the steel frame. It maintained the exact humidity required to keep the marble from expanding and cracking. The system was the heartbeat of the house. Without it running at precise calibration, the marsh would reclaim the land within 3 years. The architectural journals knew about the marble and the glass. Nobody except me knew about the heartbeat. I put the house and Evelyn's name on our wedding day. I walked her through every room. I showed her how the glass walls retracted into the floor. I showed her how the light hit the stone at noon in the great room. I told her this was hers. That whatever happened in my business, she would always have her sanctuary. She kissed me and called it the most romantic thing she had ever seen. What I did not know was that she had already met Miller. Richard Miller had been my head of operations for 6 years. I had hired him at 31 when nobody else would give him a chance after a failed startup. I had trained him, defended him, and eventually trusted him with the operational side of everything I built. I thought of him the way I had thought of no colleague before, as something close to a younger brother. He had been in my house. He had eaten at my table. He had met Evelyn on the first day she came to the office. That was 4 years before I found out. The betrayal did not come as a storm. It came as a clinical erasure delivered at the moment of maximum vulnerability. I had undergone a 12-hour spinal surgery. Years of carrying the physical weight of my projects had finally broken the foundation of my own body. I was still hazy from anesthesia, my back held together by titanium and hope, when the discharge nurse handed me my personal effects. I expected Evelyn in the waiting room. The quiet hum of the car. Her hand on my arm in the elevator. There was a man in a cheap suit I had never seen standing at the end of the corridor. He handed me a manila envelope without saying a word. A temporary restraining order. A petition for divorce. Citing irreconcilable financial negligence. I took a cab to the palace. Every bump in the road was a blade between my vertebrae. When I reached the gates I had designed and pressed my thumb to the scanner, the light blinked red. A robotic voice, my own programmed voice, told me access was denied. I looked through the glass walls of the great room. Miller was standing at my bar, holding a glass of the 30-year scotch I had saved for our silver anniversary. Evelyn was beside him. She was laughing at something he had said. They did not see me. I stood at the gate of my own house, in a paper hospital bracelet, unable to get inside. The 3 months that followed were the most precise dismantling of a human being I have ever witnessed from the inside. Evelyn was strategic. She knew I was physically broken and financially exposed. She moved fast while I could not move at all. She claimed in court filings that my obsession with the atmospheric control system was evidence of psychological deterioration. She brought in experts who called my engineering methodology erratic and dangerous. She painted me as a man who had built a monument to his own instability. 2 weeks after the surgery, from a $12 motel room at the edge of the county line, I watched the local news. The headline read, Evelyn's new society hub. She was hosting a gala in the palace. The rivals I had spent a decade outcompeting, men who had looked for cracks in my reputation for years, were walking through my front door. They were standing on the teak floors I had protected with my life. They were toasting to the woman who had handed them the keys. Evelyn stepped onto the balcony, the one I had reinforced with extra steel so she would always feel safe, and looked out toward the dark. She did not know I was watching from the motel row. But she smiled anyway. It was the smile of someone who believed the game was over. I sat on the edge of a bed that smelled of stale cigarettes, my back against the headboard, watching my life be distributed as a party favor. My colleagues had stopped calling. My credit was frozen. I was socially dead. But here is what Evelyn did not account for. She was celebrating in a house that needed me to survive. And I had been gone for 63 days. I did not file countermotions. I did not make dramatic calls. I did not try to explain myself to people whose minds she had already furnished. I disappeared. I took construction work under a different name. Day labor in the Georgia heat, high-vis vest, hard hat, nobody's business. I became a face in the dust. And I watched. I knew the physics of that coastline better than Evelyn knew the balance of her new accounts. The atmospheric control system had a maintenance schedule written into its code. Every 90 days it required a specific encrypted handshake. A sequence only I had. Without it, the system did not simply pause. It shifted into what I had named, in a line of code she had never thought to read, deconstruction mode. The house did not fail. It began to return. It started as a faint whistle in the vents that Miller probably dismissed as coastal wind. It was not wind. It was internal pressure failing. The salt air, no longer filtered by my algorithms, began to enter the structure. The teak floors, deprived of precision humidity management, began to buckle and pull away from the subfloor. The steel frame began to bleed rust through the marble. Long orange streaks, weeping down the white walls like the building was showing its wounds. Evelyn brought in contractors from Atlanta. They arrived in expensive trucks and left in confusion. Every repair they attempted accelerated the decay. They could not see the ecosystem. They were looking at a house. They did not know they were looking at a living thing that was being very slowly and very deliberately rejected. She filed an insurance claim for structural failure. Millions of dollars. The adjusters denied it. They cited the court record she had built, the one where she had successfully argued, before a judge, that I was financially negligent and professionally incompetent. She had put my failure on public record to take my pride. In doing so, she had ensured that no insurance company would ever pay to save her prize. They simply pointed to her own testimony. She had used my name to bury me. She had buried herself with it. The auction was held on a Tuesday in March in a half-empty county building that smelled of old carpet and fluorescent light. The palace had been foreclosed, classified as a stigma property, structurally compromised, environmentally damaged, carrying debt that exceeded its current assessed value by nearly $2 million. The bank wanted it gone. Nobody in the room wanted it at all. The morning of the auction, I drove out to the property one last time before heading to the county building. I don't know exactly what I expected to find. Maybe I just needed to see it. 19 years of my life sitting in dead marsh grass and orange rust, and I wanted to look at it one more time before a gavel decided its future. I parked at the edge of the coast road and walked to the property line. That's when I saw her. Evelyn was already there. She was standing in the waist-high dead grass, her back to the road, facing the house. That $2,000 wool coat completely swallowed by the marsh, her designer heels somewhere in the Georgia mud underneath her. She wasn't moving. She was just standing there, looking up at the boarded windows and the rust-weeping marble the way you look at something you know you are seeing for the last time. She had come to say goodbye. She still had the deed in her name that morning. She still had the keys. She still had the legal right to every inch of that structure. But she was standing in the mud because she already knew the truth that the auction would make official before noon. The house had become a tomb, and she could not go inside. Not without me. I stood at the property line and watched her for a long moment. She had no idea I was there. She had no idea that in a few hours, in a half-empty county building that smelled of old carpet and fluorescent light, I was going to raise my hand. I watched her stand there in the grass, and I felt nothing that resembled anger. I felt something older and quieter than that. The particular stillness of a man who wound a clock a long time ago and is now simply watching it finish. I turned. I walked back to my truck and left. I arrived in the faded work jacket I had been wearing for 2 years. I sat in the back row. Evelyn was in the front. Her coat was still expensive, but something in the way she wore it had changed. She sat with her shoulders pulled inward, the posture of someone who has been defending a position for so long they have forgotten what standing straight feels like. Miller was not with her. He had gone when the accounts ran dry. The bidding opened at a fraction of the land value. The room did not move. I raised my hand. She heard it. She turned. Her face changed in the way that faces change when the last version of a story a person has been telling themselves finally meets the actual facts. She stood and asked how I was there. She asked how I could afford to bid on what she called. And I want you to notice this, what she called the house I had destroyed. I stood up slowly. I told her the truth. Not with anger. Not for her benefit. For the record. I explained the maintenance schedule coded into the system. I explained deconstruction mode. I explained that the house had not failed. It had performed exactly as designed. Every contractor she hired, every intervention she attempted, every repair that made things worse. All of it was the house running the only program it had left to run. I told her I had given her a palace. I had kept the heartbeat. The gavel fell. I bought the ruins for 10% of what I had built them for. Essentially the price of the dirt. The sale did not cover the original mortgage. Evelyn left that room with nothing but debt and a legal record that proved she had overseen the destruction of a landmark structure. She had fought for the crown. She got the bill for the funeral. That evening I stood at the edge of the property line and looked at what I owned. The house was dark. The orange rust stains were visible even in the fading light. The boarded windows gave it the look of something that had closed its eyes. The marsh grass moved in the salt wind all around it. Evelyn was gone by the time I arrived. There was nothing left to say, and I had nothing I wanted to say. I climbed the porch steps. The wood groaned under my weight the way old wood does, not in protest, in recognition. I pulled the brass master key from my jacket pocket. I slid it into the lock of the hand-carved front door. The tumblers turned. From somewhere deep below the floors, a low hum began to move through the structure. The atmospheric control system waking from 3 years of deconstruction. The fan spinning up. The pressure equalizing. The sensors reading the salt content in the air and beginning, for the first time in 3 years, to correct it. The lights, flickering and failing for years, came on steady. The house was not rejecting me. It was breathing again. I walked through the great room. My footsteps echoed against the warped teak. At the mantel, under a thin layer of dust, sat my grandfather's brass level. The one I had placed there the day we finished the build. The one Evelyn had never moved because she had never understood why it was there. I picked it up, wiped the glass face with my thumb. The green bubble settled between the 2 black lines. Perfectly level. I stood there for a long time with that level in my hands, listening to the house breathe around me. The hum of the system, the equalization of pressure, the slow correction of 3 years of damage beginning its work in the walls and floors and bones of the building. Evelyn thought she was taking a lifestyle. She thought she was claiming a status symbol. She spent her time in those rooms measuring what they were worth by the square foot and the social currency. She never once asked what was keeping them from sinking into the marsh. My grandfather told me a long time ago in a workshop that smelled of oil and cedar and hot metal. Beauty is a coat of paint, but integrity is a matter of physics. He was talking about buildings. He was talking about everything. The foundation always outlasts whatever is built on top of it. If you stayed until the end, thank you. You just watched a man lose everything he built and get it back by understanding something his wife never bothered to learn. More stories from Breach and Balance are already on your screen. Click one now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, don't miss what's coming next. See you there.